Welcome to Changing America. I'm Maria Teresa Kumar. Last week, President Obama's executive actions on immigration were dealt a blow. A federal appeals court refused to lift a temporary freeze on the administration's immigration programs, affecting an estimated 4 million undocumented immigrants. And the legal battle could add months of delay for the expansion of two key actions, DACA and DAPA. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, Ann Coulter sat down with Fusion's Jorge Ramos to talk about her new book, Adios America, the left's plan to turn our country into a hellhole. What a title, Ann.
You've said that Americans should fear immigrants more than ISIS.
Yes.
Most immigrants are not terrorists, not criminals.
I have a little tip
no
for
one,
you.
No one is biologically predisposed
if you
to
don't
commit
want
a
to
crime.
be killed by ISIS, don't go to Syria. If you don't want to be killed by a Mexican, there's nothing I can tell you.
Yes, that was Ann Coulter, standing by her claim that Americans should fear immigrants more than ISIS. Coulter is only one voice in the anti-immigration movement, but she's not alone. While not an outlandish in their claims, several members of the Republican Party are anti-immigration reform activists, and they're anti the executive action. But here's the scary truth. For 2016 Republican hopefuls, this could be their way that comes back to haunt them. As MSNBC's Amanda Sakuma writes, quote, while conservative leaders swiftly applauded the court's decision as a victory, those delays could stoke anger throughout immigrant communities as they wait in the wings for the executive actions to roll out. Resentment that could be placed squarely on the party responsible for causing those delays in the first place, the GOP. Here to discuss our nation's tone on immigration is Ali Noorani, Executive Director of the National Immigration Forum, and Hector Sanchez, Chair of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you. Gracias.
So, first, I don't know what to do with Ann Coulter, so we'll just talk about her briefly, but I think that what she does is really start stoking the fears of a changing America. And instead of actually providing leadership on it, she actually basically goes to the bottom of the barrel. Talk to me about, one, why that tone is not only offensive, but it's also scary, because you're not translating what's happening in this country.
No, it's totally unacceptable what is happening. See somebody like this person just exploiting this space, spreading lies, hate speech, and really taking advantage of like the recession that happened, the worst recession in 80 years. People trying to understand why we're in this position, and this person just spreading lies. The important element here is to understand that this kind of speech has a direct impact in the community.
It does. And talk a little bit, talk about the hate crime. So in the Latino community since 2006, and it actually parallels when Lou Dobbs was on the airwaves with CNN, we actually saw a huge increase in hate crimes against Latinos.
No, hate crimes against Latinos have a drastic increase of almost 50% in the last year, since all this anti-immigrant movement in the nation is taking a lot of space, and it's really taking a big toll in the communities. In my case, I was very close to one particular case of Marcelo Lucero in northern New York. If you really understand and see the correlation between Ann Coulter's kind of speech and what is happening on some of the streets in the United States, high schoolers going to having a couple of beers and going basically being hunting some undocumented immigrant on the street, Marcelo Lucero, and kill him just because of this lack of understanding of the issue, but just hearing these messages in the nation. It also has an impact in the quality of life of the Latino community.
And so how can we start addressing this? Because I think that she's about to go on this book tour, and people are going to hopefully not buy her books, but if you listen to the message, it's not only dangerous, but you do find some Republicans that aren't as extreme as she is, but they are espousing some of this idea that immigrants are the issue of why we're not making it in America.
Well, I think what we need right now is conservative leadership on this issue of immigrants and immigration. And we've been going back to the days of Ronald Reagan. And I mean, for Republicans, he is the,
He's Ronald.
He's Ronald, right? He's Ronnie. But when you look back, when he left office, he spoke in his farewell speech, he spoke of a shining city on a hill, and a city that welcomed people from everywhere. So for the Republican Party, they have a choice. Is it Ronald Reagan and his vision for America, or is it Ann Coulter and her vision for America? And those are two completely different journeys for not just Republicans, but for all of us in, as we would say, a changing America. So who's going to lead Republicans down this path?
And who's going to lead them? And I think, and who's going to lead them? Because right now, when you're talking about a highly contested primary, and they want their voters that are the most passionate, unfortunately, a lot of those most passionate voters align themselves more closely with Ann Coulter than they do with the majority of Republicans who actually don't believe any of this rhetoric. How is that? Who's going to be able to define that?
I mean, I think that what Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, some days, have been able to do is actually carve a path forward for Republicans and conservatives on this issue of immigration reform. But then you've got Scott Walker leaning closer to Jeff Sessions. You've got Ted Cruz and others who would much rather compete for a very small slice. I think South Carolina actually provides a really interesting example because Lindsey Graham, remember, he has won multiple elections at a statewide level in spite of being for comprehensive immigration reform. So I think it'll be interesting to watch how conservative faith, law enforcement, business leaders in South Carolina engage on this issue and then pressure Republican
Well, and South Carolina is closest to what the rest of America is looking like as far as the rapidly changing landscape versus, let's say, California, where you've had immigrants for a long time. So I think you're right. I think that could be a beacon of how to do things right. How, though, do you actually, fast forward to 2016, when in the middle of all of this, we're expecting the executive action from the president to get some sort of green light from the Supreme Court. This is going to be in the midst of the election. How do you see the Republicans moving forward, and how do you have them? Because the article that I read was talking about how the immigrant communities are not going to be forgiven, but it's their allies really that are not going to forgive, right? It's the ones that have have children who are U.S. citizens, the ones that are loved ones, that are clergy. How are they going to react to this in 2016?
I think Republicans need to understand that the negative elements of all this anti-immigrant extremism is having a deep impact in the quality of life of the Latino community. 95% to 97% of the people that have been deported are Latinos. We live in the same communities. This increases the levels of poverty in the long terms. This really affects the quality of life of our children. HB 56 in Alabama.
Well, and I guess that's the thing, is that for so long we keep having these conversations that Latinos and undocumented immigrants live in silos, but we don't, right? Like, Latinos are actually have allies that are beyond the community, and I think that's what we're talking about. It's like, how is that? So it's one thing not to pass executive action because you don't want undocumented immigrants, but how are you going to actually make sure that the person that has a loved one that's about to get deported stay on your side?
But and the amazing part about it is that when you look across the country, the fastest growth in the foreign-born population is in the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West. And that means that Americans who have been here for generations, they and their children are actually getting to know immigrants who came here just 5, 10. Right, exactly. So when that family all of a sudden loses somebody to deportation because Republicans have blocked progress on the Hill or in the courts, that person who is not an immigrant, who may be white, says, you know what, there's something fundamentally wrong with where we're going as a country. I need to pressure my member of Congress. So what's happening is that America is not just changing in terms of becoming more diverse, but it's also changing in its understanding of each other. And that, to me, is a real source of optimism. And it means that in order for Republicans to get out of their corner, they've got to do something constructive.
And what is that?
From our perspective, it's starting to put bills on the floor. It's starting to run a process in the House and the Senate, the two chambers that they control, to move immigration reform forward, because they have an opportunity to actually get credit for fixing the system by 2016. Or they can get credit for continuing to block changes.
And what is this issue that recently the Libre Initiative came out saying that Hillary Clinton's promise of immigration reform was too extreme? How do we talk about that? Because I think that it's very much, we have to make sure that that Congress is playing their role. But how do we address this issue of Hillary saying she's coming out too much for the immigrant? Is that possible?
Well, the Libre Initiative, we need to, first of all, understand the direct correlation that they have with the Koch brothers and what the Koch brothers mean, and what are the correlation between Latino priorities. By the way, next week, NHLA, which is the coalition of all the Latino organizations, we're bringing the Latino priorities to the nation. It will be important to make the correlation of Latino priorities and where the Libre Initiative stands and where the Koch brothers stands. We need to make sure...
NHLA, it's a bipartisan, correct?
Bipartisan, so it really brings both parties to the table, and we say these are the priorities. So when we talk about the Libre Initiative and when we talk about Hillary and any other candidate, we're going to compare those priorities to each one of the candidates and see where they stand in the Latino priorities in the nation, and that will be a guidance for Latino voters or in key swing states.
So we keep telling folks that they have to tread carefully moving forward and how they talk to about immigrants in the United States. They definitely don't want to repeat Romney of self-deportation. What would be your advice to Republican candidates right now?
Our advice to Republican candidates is, yes, the message is important, but the substance is important too. Latino, Asian, new American voters across the country are more sophisticated than I think anybody realizes. They're reading Spanish language press, they're reading Asian language press, they're reading English language press. So people know what candidates are going to say, but they also know what Republicans on the Hill are going to do. Yeah. So it's not just the message, it's actually the substance.
You know, and I actually like to compare a new voter, and this is basically what you're talking about, a new voter to someone that's going to go buy a car for the first time. They're going to kick the tires. They're not just going to go to the first person that basically presents them with a nice shiny new car. They're actually want to know the substance. And the same thing with a new voter. They're going to do the same thing with the Democratic and Republican Party. So they want substance. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hope to see you back soon.